You've seen these movies, you probably grew up with them, but I guarantee you've never seen them like this. The 1980s is remembered as the decade of big hair, neon lights, and Reagan-era excess. But underneath all of that, hidden in plain sight across cinema screens worldwide, something else was happening entirely. Filmmakers were embedding genuine occult knowledge into mainstream entertainment, ancient mysteries, consciousness research, ritual magic, spiritual warfare, transmitted directly into the minds of millions of people who had absolutely no idea what they were seeing. Here's what makes this list different from every other 80s film breakdown you've seen. We're not talking about surface-level horror analysis or nostalgia trips. We're going deeper than that. Each of these films contains a specific piece of occult knowledge, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what was being transmitted and why. Let's start with the film that set the tone for everything that followed. Lucifer Rising. Most people have never heard of Kenneth Anger. That's exactly how he wanted it. While Hollywood was churning out blockbusters, Anger, a practicing Thelemite and direct inheritor of Aleister Crowley's magical tradition, was doing something no filmmaker had ever attempted. Lucifer Rising had been in production for nearly a decade before its 1980 release. The people on screen aren't actors playing magicians. They're actual practitioners performing genuine Thelemic ceremonies. The Egyptian symbols, the ritual implements, the specific color sequences, every element was chosen for magical effect, not aesthetic appeal. Here's what Anger understood that nobody else did. Cinema isn't just a recording device, it's a transmission device. Light projected through a lens into a darkened room full of people in a relaxed, receptive state. Sound familiar? It should. That's almost identical to the conditions used in ceremonial magic to alter consciousness. Anger proved that occult knowledge didn't need to hide inside horror films or exploitation cinema. It could exist as pure art. And that realization opened a door that the rest of this decade walked straight through. The question is, who else was paying attention? The Shining. Stanley Kubrick was not a man who made accidents. Every frame of The Shining was obsessively controlled. Kubrick famously shot some scenes over 100 times. So when you notice that the Overlook Hotel's geography is architecturally impossible, rooms that couldn't physically exist, windows that look out onto walls, that's not a mistake. That's a message. The Shining introduced mainstream audiences to a concept that psychical researchers had been studying for decades. Locations accumulate energy, traumatic events leave imprints, and certain people like Danny Torrance, can perceive those imprints across time. Danny's ability isn't presented as fantasy. It's presented as a natural human capacity that most people have simply never developed. He sees the Grady girls before they appear. He reads Dick Halloran's thoughts from across a room. He experiences the hotel's entire violent history as present tense reality. But here's the layer most analysts miss entirely. The carpet patterns in the Overlook contain sacred geometry. The room number, 237, changed from the book's 217, corresponds to specific numerological systems. The Native American imagery throughout the film isn't decoration. It's Kubrick acknowledging that the land itself carries memory, that the violence done to indigenous people created exactly the kind of psychic residue the hotel feeds on. Kubrick never explained any of this. He refused to. Because the film was designed to work on you whether you understood it consciously or not. That's not filmmaking. That's initiation. Altered states. Ken Russell's Altered States asked a question that mainstream science was terrified to take seriously. What if consciousness isn't produced by the brain? What if the brain is more like a receiver, and certain practices can tune that receiver to frequencies most people never access? Dr. Eddie Jessup isn't a fictional character built from nothing. He's based on John Lilly, a real neuroscientist who spent years in sensory deprivation tanks, sometimes combined with psychedelic compounds, documenting what he found on the other side of ordinary awareness. What he found was not comforting. Russell took those ideas and pushed them to their logical extreme. If consciousness can expand beyond normal boundaries, what happens to the physical body? What happens to identity? What happens to time? The film's answer is visceral and disturbing. Jessup doesn't just experience altered states, he physically regresses. His body remembers forms that predate human evolution. His consciousness accesses what shamanic traditions call ancestral memory, the lived experience of every being that came before us, encoded somewhere in our biology. Indigenous cultures have known this for thousands of years. Altered States put it on a cinema screen in 1980 and called it science fiction. It wasn't fiction. And the audiences who felt something shift while watching it, they knew that too. Poltergeist. Here's a question nobody was asking in 1982. Why does Carol Ann communicate with spirits through the television? She could have heard voices anywhere. Through walls, through dreams, through mirrors, a classic device with centuries of occult history. but Tobe Hooper chose the television, specifically the static between channels, the signal that exists in the space between signals. That choice was not random. Television had become the central altar of the American home by 1982. Families arranged their furniture around it. They scheduled their lives around it. They sat in front of it in a relaxed, receptive state. Sound familiar? For hours every day. Poltergeist was suggesting something that media theorists wouldn't articulate clearly for another decade. The television was already functioning as a portal. Carol Ann just made it literal. The film's other major occult contribution is Tangina Barons, a psychic medium presented not as a fraud, not as a villain, not as comic relief, but as the most competent person in the room. She understands exactly what's happening. She has the knowledge and the tools to address it, and she's completely matter-of-fact about all of it. For millions of suburban families watching this film, Tangina was their first encounter with the idea that psychic ability was real, that spiritual practitioners had genuine knowledge, and that the dead didn't simply disappear. Poltergeist made that idea feel not just possible, but urgent. Videodrome. David Cronenberg saw something in 1983 that most people wouldn't understand until the age of social media. Max Wren doesn't just watch Videodrome. Videodrome watches Max. The signal doesn't just enter his television, it enters his body. It rewrites his perception of reality. It makes him a weapon for forces he can't see and doesn't understand. Cronenberg called this the new flesh, the merger of human biology and media technology into something that had never existed before. Something that couldn't be understood through either a purely biological or purely technological framework. Here's what makes Videodrome genuinely occult rather than just science fiction. The Videodrome signal functions exactly like a magical working. It bypasses conscious resistance. It operates through desire and fascination. It creates dependency before the target even realizes they've been targeted, and it uses the target's own psychology as the mechanism of control. Every element of that description applies to modern media consumption. The algorithm that learns your desires, the content designed to create compulsive engagement, the gradual reshaping of perception through repeated exposure. Cronenberg wasn't predicting the future. He was describing a process that occultists had understood for centuries, the use of image, symbol, and emotional resonance to reshape consciousness, and showing what it would look like when that process was industrialized. Long live the new flesh. You're already living in it. HELLRAISER. Clive Barker didn't research occultism for HELLRAISER, he lived it. The lament configuration, the puzzle box at the center of the film, is based on actual magical implements described in grimoires dating back centuries. Objects designed to function as keys, not metaphorical keys, literal mechanisms for opening doors between states of existence. What Barker understood, and what makes HELLRAISER genuinely dangerous as a piece of occult cinema, is that the Cenobites aren't evil in any conventional sense. They're not demons trying to corrupt innocent souls. They're explorers. They've gone further into the experience of sensation, pleasure, pain, and everything beyond both than any human being has dared to go. And they're confused when Frank treats their arrival as a horror rather than a fulfillment. The film's real subject is the relationship between desire and transcendence. Frank wants to experience everything. He solves the box because he believes there's something beyond ordinary human experience worth having. He's right. He just catastrophically underestimates the cost. That tension between the genuine spiritual impulse toward transcendence and the dangers of pursuing it without wisdom or preparation is at the heart of every serious occult tradition. Barker put it in a mainstream horror film and wrapped it in enough visceral imagery that audiences absorb the teaching without necessarily recognizing it as one. The box is still out there, and some of you are already looking for it. Angel Heart. Alan Parker gave us something in 1987 that almost no Hollywood film had attempted before. A genuine, respectful, accurate depiction of African diaspora spiritual practice, and he used it to tell a story about the most fundamental occult question of all: who owns your soul? Harry Angel is hired to find a man named Johnny Favorite. The deeper he investigates, the more the evidence points somewhere he refuses to look. The voodoo practitioners he encounters aren't obstacles or villains. They're witnesses. They can see what Harry can't or won't see about himself. The New Orleans setting is essential. Voodoo, or more accurately hoodoo, is a sophisticated spiritual system with deep roots in West African tradition, transformed and strengthened by the experience of slavery and survival. It understands things about the relationship between the living and the dead, between identity and memory, between spiritual debt and physical consequence, that Western religious traditions have largely forgotten. Parker didn't use that tradition as exotic backdrop. He used it as the lens through which the film's central mystery is revealed. The spiritual practitioners in Angel Heart are the only characters who actually understand what's happening. By the time Harry Angel discovers the truth about himself, the audience has been quietly educated in a worldview where identity is not fixed, where spiritual contracts have real consequences, and where the past is never truly past. That's not horror, that's theology. The Lost Boys. Strip away the leather jackets and the hair metal soundtrack and look at what The Lost Boys is actually about. A young man moves to a new place. He encounters a group with secret knowledge and hidden power. He's offered membership, but membership requires transformation. He must give up his old self, his old life, his old way of seeing the world. The process is irreversible, and the community he's joining operates by completely different rules than the society he came from. That is a classical initiation narrative. It follows the same structure as mystery school initiations documented across ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. The same structure as shamanic initiation traditions found on every inhabited continent. The same structure that secret societies have used for centuries. Joel Schumacher dressed it in 1987 California and called it a vampire movie. But Michael's journey, the gradual transformation, the loss of his old identity, the moment of no return, the discovery of what he's actually become, follows the initiatory pattern with remarkable precision. The Lost Boys resonated so deeply with teenage audiences because adolescence is itself an initiation. The old self dies. Something new emerges. The question is always what community you're being initiated into and what values that community transmits. The film understood that, and it used that understanding to make vampirism feel not like a curse, but like a calling. They live. John Carpenter gave the most important piece of occult knowledge in this entire list a pair of sunglasses and a professional wrestler. The premise of They Live is deceptively simple. Nada finds glasses that allow him to see reality as it actually is. The billboards that say, consume and obey. The paper money that says, this is your God. The ruling class revealed as something other than human, hiding behind a signal that keeps everyone else asleep. But here's what Carpenter understood that makes this genuinely occult, rather than just political satire. The glasses don't create a new reality. They reveal the one that was always there. The control system isn't imposed from outside. It operates through the willing participation of people who have been conditioned not to see it. And the most radical act available to any individual isn't violence or revolution. It's simply perception. See clearly. That's it. That's the whole teaching. Every serious esoteric tradition, from Gnosticism to Hermeticism to Vedanta to Sufism, contains some version of this teaching. The world as ordinarily perceived is a kind of dream or illusion. Spiritual practice is the process of waking up, and the forces that benefit from your sleep will resist your waking with everything they have. Carpenter put that teaching in a horror movie, and it grossed $13 million in its opening weekend. Millions of people absorbed one of the core insights of Western esotericism while eating popcorn. That's the most elegant piece of occult transmission on this entire list. The Serpent and the Rainbow. Wes Craven's final entry on this list is the only one based on a true story, and that matters. Wade Davis was a real Harvard ethnobotanist who traveled to Haiti in the early 1980s to investigate reports of zombification. What he found wasn't superstition or folklore. It was a sophisticated pharmacological and psychological system, a method for temporarily suspending consciousness so completely that the subject appeared dead, was buried, and was later revived in a state of profound psychological dependency. The zombie wasn't a monster. The zombie was a warning, a demonstration of what the zombification tradition could do to those who violated its codes. A living example of what it looks like when a human being is stripped of will, identity, and autonomy. Craven took Davis's research and made it visceral, but the film's real power comes from what Davis's investigation revealed about the relationship between consciousness, community, and control. The zombie powder worked not just because of its chemical components, but because the target and the entire community believed in the system. Because belief, in certain conditions, is not metaphor, it's mechanism. That insight, that consciousness is not purely individual, that belief systems have genuine power to shape physical reality, that spiritual knowledge is a form of technology, is the thread that connects every film on this list. The 1980s didn't just produce great horror movies. It produced a decade-long transmission of esoteric knowledge to the largest audience in human history, and most of them had no idea it was happening. 10 films, 10 pieces of a puzzle that the 1980s assembled in plain sight, from Anger's ritual cinema to Carpenter's perceptual awakening, from Kubrick's encoded architecture to Craven's pharmacological spirituality. Each film transmitted something specific, something that couldn't be said directly, but could be felt, absorbed, and carried forward by everyone who watched.